know how we talked about my dad growing up, even when Keith was around. It wasn't like it was taboo. It is just that presence, that living in it, that asking questions, remembering, reminiscing, even like joking. We have come a long way, or coming a long way, in talking about our feelings and our mental health and our anxieties. But death is still a taboo. And I think to normalize that, I think is quite important.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily. What happens when grief arrives at such a young age that you don't even have words for it? On average, in every classroom, there's at least one child who's already lost a parent or a sibling. Yet so many of us grow up without the language, space, or permission to talk about grief, to share in our tears, in our pain, our confusion, how we're really feeling, and also in the love, the meaning, and the beautiful memories. And how we're met in these moments really matters, because grief doesn't just express what we've lost, it shapes who we become. And my guest today, Jamie Gamache's dad, died suddenly when he was just 2 years old. Then at 18, his stepdad died suddenly too. And we speak to how we can find gentle presence with our grief and speak about it openly, and how that can shape our growth and our becoming in life. And this is a conversation that feels particularly important in a world where so many of us, and particularly men, are rarely encouraged to share our feelings. Jamie is the co-founder of Low Key Films, a B Corp certified creative production studio. He's worked with music artists, including Dave, Stormzy, and Mabel, and with major brands, including Peloton and Nike. And he's produced the feature film Kindling, which follows a group of young men who return to their hometown to turn their terminally ill friend Sid's final summer into a celebration of life, love, and friendship. I'm really excited to dive into our conversations. We've had now quite a few conversations on grief, and we always go deep. But I figured you are a filmmaker, a storyteller. So I thought, let's start by looking at the story arc of your life so far and how death and grief has been present for you. So you can start us anywhere that you wish to, and we'll flow from there.
Yes, I'd say grief has definitely been a big part of my life, and massively shaped, I think, the person I've become as well. I think for some people, grief kind of comes, and maybe it depends when it comes in their life, but it doesn't necessarily become all consuming or shape who they are. But I definitely say it's definitely shaped who I am. I lost my dad when I was 2, so very, very young.
Yeah.
My mum was still pregnant with my sister.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I was 2. He died of a heart attack, just one day, didn't come home. Mm-hmm. Obviously I was way too young to remember that. And I think some people think that grief at a young age, I've had friends more recently who have kids whose their grandparents have passed away, and they've said, oh, we've told them, but we don't think they really understand and know. And it's, as you get older, you absolutely do know. Of course someone just suddenly isn't there. And while I can't remember it, that throughout, particularly as I grew up and came to understand and appreciate that I'd never see my dad again, and I guess understand what a dad was, as I started to see my friends with their dads, or even my friends' dads with me, was when I started to grieve what I was never going to have, in a way. So that was, I guess, step one. Then my mum met my stepdad, Keith, when I was probably 6 or 7, maybe. So, quite like 4 or 5 years after my dad died. And Keith brought me and my sister up. He moved in and gave us all of the things that, you would hope for from a dad. Definitely taught us right from wrong in his way. Filled me with ambition and drive. And, really, I mean, he didn't, he was a window cleaner. He didn't earn loads, but we never went without, and really gave us everything. And I genuinely don't think, my mum as a single parent, she would have been fine, but the life that the two of them were able to give us together, I think was potentially significantly different. So Yeah, he was amazing and really shaped me and my sister. And we had so many incredible holidays. We used to go to France. They bought a small gîte in France, and we used to go there for every summer for like 6 weeks. And he was my dad. I called him Keith. I never called him my dad, but he was my my world in that regard. And he then very suddenly died, had an accident when I was 18. And I had the kind of timing of that was I about? I think I was 18 or 19. And I wanted to go to the university, and it was the only university I said I wanted to go to, which was University of Surrey, to study music and sound recording.
Yeah.
And I found out in the August, when you get your results and whether you get into uni, that I hadn't got in. And it was the most devastating moment probably in my life up until that point. Single day, that felt like a grief.
Yeah.
Felt like I was grieving something there.
It was a grief, yeah.
Couldn't understand it. I didn't want to go anywhere else. I was, really torn apart. And I decided, well, I'm going to take a year off and I'm going to resit my exams, and hopefully, I'll get the grades I need and I'll get in next year. And a month later, Keith died. And he was helping someone. He was doing a job on a roof. He should have had more. Keith was classic. He'd help anyone. If someone asked you to go up on his roof, he'd do it, and he wouldn't charge you for it. And he'd have a quick look because he'd be down in 5 minutes. And that's what he did one day. He went up on a roof on an equestrian center, and it wasn't safe. He didn't have a cherry picker or anything, any kind of safety measures. And he just, fell through the roof and died. So very, very sudden accident. And I remember I was at home, around that time I'd started a music covers duo with my friend. And we had started, I think we were learning how to play like Brown Eyed Girl or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And we were at my mum's house. She was out with like some friends, and she called me and said, "Oh, just so you know, Keith's been, rushed to hospital, and he's like fallen off a wall or something." She didn't know what was, like, silly. I'm going there now, but don't worry. Like, I think it's all okay. So I just carried on cracking on, then got a knock on the door, and 2 police officers were there. And I remember my mum has always weirdly installed in me that, like, 2 police officers, if one comes, there's nothing to, but if 2 come, something's wrong. 2 police officers turned up when my dad died. And they turned up, and my heart just sunk, and they asked if, this was where Keith lived, and they needed to see his medication. And they said, it's really bad. So my friend drove me to the St. George's, drove me to the hospital, and I just got there. My mum I've never seen my mum. My mum is incredibly strong woman. I've seen her cry a small handful of times, but also incredibly emotional. You have some mums who are like, or parents who are strong, never show their emotion, and they're stoic. Typical dads in some way. My mum is very emotional, very holds her, she's very present. Always there to talk about her feelings and hear yours. But I've very rarely seen her cry, or at least not be capable. And she was just a complete wreck. And that's the thing that's sort of out of all of it has kind of stayed with me. And I think probably affected me the most. I kind of think about that. So I think those are the 2 parts, really. I'd kind of say my adolescence was almost bookended with, or my childhood in a way was sort of bookended with grief, starting off losing my dad. And when I lost Keith, I became an adult, like straight at that moment. I saw my mum in that way, and I was like, I thought she couldn't even cope on her own at that point, and she absolutely could. But the thing, what you think in your mind at that point is, oh, it's just me now. I've got to get my shit together, grow up. I've got to find my way in life and and I just became really independent, for good and bad, really, from that point on. So I'd say that it was a kind of a bookend, I suppose, in many ways.
Oh, Jamie, a bookend and grief that many don't experience in their childhood. I think I was reading statistics that said that I think it's about two in every classroom, so two in about every 20-25 children have lost a parent or a sibling. And that to me was a statistic that made me think, because I can't remember death and grief being spoken about much at school, other than the one kid in my class who went off and then came back very quickly, and it was never to be spoken about again. So obviously just want to honor you and your experience, and obviously with that bookend and those transitional moments, like you mentioned when Keith died, that, okay, right, I have now stepped into my adulthood. And grief really, I mean, loss is change that's forced upon us that we never asked for, isn't it?
No, definitely not.
So I really want to dive in as well to, because you mentioned around how death and grief have really shaped you and who you are. And how has grief been your teacher in life, in that guiding your path forwards, maybe from that moment when Keith died?
If I think when Keith died, I was just turning 18. I was enjoying lay-ins. I was sleeping in sometimes till like 12 o'clock. And Keith was a worker. He was, unless you're getting up, and going to work, no one's going to be paying your way. He'd worked for himself his whole life. So there wasn't sick pay, or he couldn't work from home and just move the mouse every so often. He was a grafter, and he was giving me a lot of grief around that time, calling me lazy. I sort of discovered going out with my friends at that time and drinking. So I was probably hungover a little bit, and I was being a teenager, and he couldn't get his head around that really. And so when he died, those were the words that just really, I never got to prove to him that I wasn't lazy.
Oh, wow.
I never got to prove that it was just a phase, or I was just let me be a teenager and watch what I'm going to do one day,
Yeah.
So I think a big thing for me was, whether it's proving him wrong, in many regards, is showing him and making him proud, because he'd always say great things about me to other people. So I think definitely with Keith, it's definitely the positive way is making him proud. The slightly more toxic is proving him wrong. With my dad, so my dad was a creative, he was a musician, so he was always playing in bands, and one of the things that I had, he had a song called an album of, he did covers, but someone had made, when he died, someone made an album of all of the cover recordings in pubs and at clubs and different things, and put them on an album and called it the hits of Mark Gamache or something like that, and had a picture on it. And I used to listen to that CD over and over and over again. And he became, honestly, he'd like a rock god, really, in my mind. He was a god, because it almost became like a faith in a way. Like, he was so awesome, and the way people described him to me was, he was funny, he was caring, everything you could. I'm sure he had some bad traits as well, but no one would ever tell me about those. So he became because I had no memories of him, he was what I imagine it would be like to follow a god in a way. And so he really became this, it was like my faith, was my kind of guiding light. And I think because of his creative background, when I was going through school and growing up, it was always music and drama were the two, what way was I going to, what would I pursue more? And now I work in film, so I guess it's more, I'm not in front of the camera, but I've face for radio, as I say, more behind the camera. And so I think with my dad, it's definitely pursuing a career almost that he never managed to do. So I think that's kind of with the two of them. But like any grief, but I think particularly when you're so young, there's a massive element of living in the moment, trying to be present, knowing that I feel very grounded, and my expectations of other people, of life, of most situations are quite low in some regards, because I just don't expect too much, because I know that it can all just go. And sometimes that is to my downfall sometimes, because I underestimate things. But actually it's meant that I'm always pleasantly surprised. So I think there's some elements, I guess, that it's how it's maybe defined me, or how that's kind of taught me some lessons. I mean, positivity as well. I feel I am a very positive person, and I don't know if that's because of that perspective of knowing what it could be, and knowing that where I am right now, no matter what struggles I'm going through, is nothing like what that was like, and the months, years around it. So yeah, a few different things.
Wow. Well, what I can feel is that it goes so deep into these different facets of our life. As you shared, there could be a duplicity or a multiplicity in it. There can be some things where you go, I can see the positive side of that, but I can also see the side that's maybe slightly toxic or unhelpful or whatever it is. So I think that's a really important acknowledgement. But actually what I could feel was there is so much, because I feel so strongly about the opportunities for us to grow through our grief. And you mentioned the word presence, and I think that's the power, when we can be present and when we can have people around us. I love that your dad's friends created his album, the Mark Gamache album for you, is so powerful, because that enabled you to continue your bonds with him and to build your own relationship with him, and then look at that influence on you and your own creativity and all that's flowed through.
That is so, you're right, that presence, like people, it's why I think it's so important to talk about grief and ask those questions, because those people aren't here anymore. So you can't just forget about them, and you don't forget about them just for them. You say, like, I wanted to keep my dad in my memory for him, but actually it's as much for me. And whether I was at, the age I was then, I couldn't talk about him. But even now, like, I want to talk about that. I think people find death quite an awkward subject, quite an awkward thing to ask about, because they think it's going to take you to a place that will make you emotional. And yeah, it will, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, and or his box, it shouldn't be locked. it should be, ready to open when you need it, I suppose. So I was so grateful for people keeping my dad, in my memory, and sort of normalizing that in a way.
I love that. And I love the Pandora's box analogy. Now, don't quote me, because my mythology knowledge is not so strong.
It'll be better than mine.
I believe at the bottom of Pandora's box is actually, I forget if it's hope, if it's joy, but there's something that is positive. So there, it was that's the truth of that mythology. Again, I'm saying the truth, slightly doubting myself and my sources here. So it may or may not be the truth, but I have had it recounted to me that actually in opening Pandora's box and in feeling the difficult and seeing that which is obviously in grief, the horrors of our grief, or with the Pandora's box, it was horrors of the world, wasn't it? But that's how you access then that hope, that meaning, that growth. And for me, I think that you share such wisdom, because we do avoid it. And I think particularly when there's children involved, I think there's that natural protective mechanism that people can want to do, which is, we won't talk about it. And I can only imagine that, especially when the bereavement happens when the child is a toddler, a baby, that it can be easy for people to sort of go, okay, that our culture's we're moving on from this, can then create a very big gap, I can imagine, for some children of, okay, but who was my mum or my dad or my sibling? And actually, that's where there's such power in conversations. And as you shared, if we don't talk about these emotions, thing is, it doesn't mean they go anywhere. It's just that they get punched down, and they exist somewhere within our body.
You look at what happens to people, I guess, that were adopted.
Yes.
99, well, actually, I don't know what the statistic is, but I'm going to say 90% or whatever, when they get to a certain age, want to go and find who their, birth parents were. Mm-hmm. And so if I was to have kept the idea of my dad or my dad's death in some kind of box or not talked about it, I would have got to this age totally not understanding it, having not lived in it or through it, and have all of these questions. I had to do it now. His mum, my nana, who I was incredibly close to, isn't alive now. She died a few years ago, but she was so incredibly close and so kept him and all of those stories. And I felt close to him because I had her. I'd be winding her up and she would say, "Oh, you're just like, you're just like your dad." That's like what he used to do. There's just such like nice things like that are just when you feel like you never knew, I never really knew him. Mm-hmm. I actually really feel like I do because of that presence that my family, enabled and showed me.
Wow. I think that's so powerful. And it feels like, I think what I can feel as well is the different family roles and the opportunities. I love that with your nan. That's so good. That's such nan energy, isn't it? I'm thinking about my nan who died last year, and I'm like, yeah, my nan would have been exactly that way, with all the storytelling and the being able to point out and make jokes and stuff like that. It's so lovely.
You hear I've probably heard the same story about when she broke down and my dad went to help pick her up and he pretended he was a policeman and all of it. I've probably heard that story 20 times. I was there for it every time she told me.
Oh, I love that. So what I would be really curious to know as well is, just sitting from your experience as a child who grew up with grief, what advice would you give to anyone who's put in the really tragic situation that your mum obviously was, of being bereaved with young children? What advice would you give to someone in those shoes?
I mean, I obviously couldn't tell you how she dealt with it in the moment, when I was, and obviously we went through it twice, and it's a very traumatic time that, to be honest, so when Keith died, I can't honestly really remember much of that year, in all honesty. I think I just have shut that out, in many regards. But I do think, because I know how we talk about it now, and I know how we talked about my dad growing up, even when Keith was around. It wasn't like it was taboo, right? It is just that, that presence, that living in it, that asking questions, remembering, reminiscing, even like joking, like joking around about that. I feel like there's such a thing around people that have died being put on a pedestal, and you can't talk ill of the dead. And don't get me wrong, there is a time and a place for it. But being able to joke and, have those very natural moments about, Keith did call me a lazy git all the time, and, some of the things that he used to do. And I think that's fine as well. So I think it's definitely being present. And I know it sounds cliche, but talking about it, because I know we have come a long way, or coming a long way, in talking about our feelings and our mental health and our anxieties. But death is still a taboo. And I think to normalize that, I think, is quite important.
Really powerful. And I think also you made the really important acknowledgement at the beginning that equally it's totally okay for anyone in any of the person who's died's orbit, but in the immediate family, if first year or however long feels numb.
Yeah.
And part of it is grace and compassion, to be like, we just muddle our way through. And I think as well, particularly if I put my feet in the shoes of anyone I've spoken to. I had a recent conversation with someone who was widowed, and she had 3 young children. And that was, she describes exactly that. You just get through, you just muddle through. And a big part of it is almost because grief is a whole body and everything experience. But I loved as well what you shared around, because what I could feel in your answer was both there's the curiosity that I think is really lovely, actually, if we can encourage that of kids to be like, ask any questions you want.
Yeah.
Let's talk about them. Let's like you said, let's laugh at some funny stuff. Let's be a bit cheeky, and let's also bring in all of the meaning and all of the love. I think that's so beautiful, of just encouraging that curiosity, as well as just in general encouraging conversations. Because actually, what I do know about, just in general, I think humans in general, we all are quite curious. And I think when we come to talk about death and grief, once we've got past our initial avoidance, there's definitely a lean in. And there's okay, now can I ask this question that previously would have made my toes curl? And I think that the more that, just in general, at any stage of life that we can be having in our families, it's something that's I'm going through with my family at the moment, after the death of my two grandmothers last year, which basically meant, as my parents, they were like, oh, well, it hits them and they're like, we're now orphans. And it's that moment where they suddenly went, and we're the oldest people, we're the oldest generation now. But it's really lovely, having been through that process with them, to see that actually there is a gentle opening and a curiosity more around conversations that just wasn't there before for them. So I think what I could really feel from what you shared is actually permission to just lean in for all of us. Be curious, ask questions, let's have a conversation. And I do think as soon as we dip one little toe in, we suddenly see actually it's not going to bite our leg off. Death isn't contagious.
No. And I can talk about the grief that I've been through, but as soon as my mum brings up the idea that she's getting older, and I can't talk about that, and I should, I can't sit here and preach and pretend that everything's, I find that incredibly difficult to talk about, whether that's because of what we've been through and how close I am with my mum, or, but that's something I find very hard to talk about.
And you're not alone. You are not alone. Exactly the same for me. It's easy when I can talk about it from the realms of my grandparents.
Yeah.
But similarly, I'm trying to think, I'm like, have I had a conversation with them about, no.
My mum tries to a couple of times, and I will be, we did her like power of attorney. She's only 67, I think. And we did a power of attorney recently, and I was just not interested in talking about why we were doing it. It was a necessary thing, a form that we had to fill in that we were never going to need, leave it on crap cookie lad, but I don't want to, and I think that's okay. My mum wants to talk about it, and I feel like I should be present for her, but maybe there are people more professionally engaged.
That's the thing. We've got to be compassionate, say one step at a time. So the fact that you were there and you did the power of attorney journey, it steps into it, isn't it? So I think that we've also got to have grace and compassion with ourselves, and understand that, obviously, rightly so, there's a lot that comes up through these conversations. So in my work as a grief coach, I never want to smack any of my clients into a wall of obviously what is all of our fears of losing those people who we love. So I think that of just being able to be very compassionate, take it step by step, and just explore it. But it is a really difficult conversation. So we obviously want to acknowledge that in this space.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing as well that I would love to speak to you about, and this really links into your film as well, around just the shared experience of men, and actually when we can be held together and really witnessed and understood in that which we're going through, whether it's as in Kindling, which was about someone who is going through terminal cancer journey and very nearly at the end, or just in general in life. Because obviously for you, and the grief that you were holding, I'm sure there've been those beloved friends and connections along the way where you're like, actually, I could really be real with them. And I think in a world where we know that for a lot of men, there is a lot of, and in general across the society, but particularly for men, there is, you mentioned around mental health, but we won't talk about our mental health, and we don't want to talk about that, which is difficult. So I'd love to hear any of your thoughts around what happens when we can share, whether it's grief or other difficult things between us, and particularly as men, what can come from that?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought I was really good at sharing I thought I was a very open person. I've just been brought up to be emotional, and I can be open, my mum or my family. And yeah, I thought I was someone who spoke about my feelings, wasn't a typical man in that regard. And I realized I am very open for other people's feelings. I'm always very much there to listen. But when it comes to my own, I apparently don't share. I'm very good at saying, yeah, not bad. And that's something that I personally have really, tried to work with over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. And I do think that is very typical of being a man. We don't talk about our feelings. When we do talk, we kind of just say facts. We say a series of facts. So if we were to talk about death, we'd say that person died, how they died. Yeah, real shame. When's the funeral? Yeah. Are you going? No. Okay.
Yeah.
We would not talk about how are you coping, how are you feeling. Close friend of mine has just lost is like his dad's best friend, and I'm making a real point of asking him, how are you doing? And because the answer is obviously shit, or obviously I'm not doing well.
Yeah.
But still ask. I think people assume I'm not going to ask because they're obviously not doing great. Well, you could also say, like, obviously, I'm sure not great, but how are you doing? Was it easier than yesterday? And having those conversations. And I've definitely felt talking about it helps, and sort of link it into the film as well. So my experience with grief, I've always gravitated generally to stories of grief as well, and other people that have been through. So, Connor and I, Loki, were working with other filmmakers there's two brothers we're working with who lost their dad when they were younger. And that was something that I instantly connected with. The story is about that, but just the fact that we had shared something similar growing up. But Connor, who is Connor O'Hara, co-founder of Loki, my best friend since we met in a band when we were 15.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and then started to come up that production company together. But when Connor was 21 or 20, he lost 2 friends within like a couple of weeks. And at that time, I feel like as we grow up, we always look to the media for role models. You have your parents, you have your friends and people around you, but you do look at media TV shows for your role models. And at that time, we're talking 2014, 2015, it was the in-between. That was in-betweeners time.
Yes.
Right? We saw men being heroic, stoic, not talking about their feelings, but then also we saw lad culture and banter and just joking about stuff. And we never, ever saw men talking about their feelings, And when Connor's friends died, he got his closest friends together in a similar way to what happens in our film, Kindling, to talk about it and try and live in it and be present. But he realized that each of them were just dealing with it in completely different ways. One was, drinking more. One was being aggressive, punching walls. Then they certainly weren't talking about it. And Connor was definitely one of the more sort of emotionally intelligent, I guess, of the group, and felt like he could communicate with it and communicate it. So we made a short film called Infinite, which became the feature film Kindling. That, yeah, as you said, is about a young man dying of terminal testicular cancer and his friends coming around him for his final summer alive. And that's not a true story, but what it was inspired by the conversations and the events that happened when Connor's friends passed.
Wow.
And actually really tragically, one of those sort of 5 friends that were part of the group when Connor lost his 2 friends, when we were in post-production on Kindling, he passed away.
Oh.
And really, you just couldn't, begin to imagine it.
Yeah.
And that film was very much for the next generation. It was about us trying to make a film that showed young men talking about their feelings, talking
Wow.
about death, looking it in the eye, being there for each other. So men could watch that film and feel like it was okay. So it was our way of, showing men as being emotionally vulnerable in the hope that someone will watch it and go, do you know what? Maybe I'll talk about how I feel a little bit more.
Wow. I mean, this is the storytelling that we so badly need, because these conversations, they can as well, when we think about the impacts of grief on our mental health and all of the risks of that for us and our outcomes in life in many different ways. These are conversations, I believe, that can change lives, that can change trajectories. In some circumstances as well, could potentially save lives as well. It's so crucial. And what advice would you give for anyone out there maybe who's grieving and thinking, I want to talk about this. I just don't know how, to your point around that, where they've maybe been quite closed, maybe it's that whole jokey, bantery, you don't talk about this stuff. What would you say is a good starting point for someone?
Two things: counselling,
Yeah.
professional help.
Yeah.
Mind Matters, I think I'm sure it's Mind Matters. Again, I'm sure there's a way of putting the right link in.
I'll have a little look. I'll definitely put some links in the show notes. Yeah.
There's ways you can self-refer, but that was one of I thought I'd had a bit of counselling when I was at school. I was like acting up, and my mum thought, he's never dealt with his dad. He needs, counselling.
Oh, wow.
So I did a bit of counselling, but with a man, and it was my first ever male. Well, it was my first counsellor, but I've since only seen women.
Yeah.
And I found that very difficult. It felt, I don't know if it was because of my relationship with men up until that point had been the way they'd been, but I didn't get on with him. But then I kind of went for everything with Keith, and then just sort of dealt with it in my way and moved on. And then it was probably like 2018, maybe 2019, that I think my nana was getting older, and my mum was like, I think you should really try and get some counselling. I was like, I'm fine. Why do I need counselling? And I think that's Connor talks about this a lot. Like, you don't have to see a counsellor when you're at breaking point, and when things, you shouldn't let it get to that point. It should be like an MOT, and go when you feel okay. Because I went, and my first session, I was not cynical, but I was very scared. I didn't know what we were going to talk about. And the idea of sitting there and the person going, oh, what's up then? And me being like, I don't really know, I don't know. And we did the first session, and I cried the entire drive home to my flat.
Wow.
Because I just felt this, like, it was the first time I'd ever felt almost like understood or heard, even though it was just someone listening to me for an hour and asking questions. And I did 6 sessions. So counselling is just amazing, but not having to do, and it can be expensive, or you have to wait, like the NHS is incredibly oversubscribed for mental health support at the moment. So there is a wait. And if you want to pay for it, or can, you're in the position that you are able to pay for it, it is expensive, but it is so worth it. And then talking with friends, honestly, like asking someone, can I talk? Can we have a chat? And I know that's the thing that people find really hard, but don't expect all of your friends to be emotionally capable. And if one person can't, find your person. I've got friends. I know the friends. There's friends that I wouldn't probably dream of, having those conversations with. Love them to bits, but that's not our dynamic. There's like Connor, for instance, who I know I can talk to about anything, and we're very open with each other. So I think it is just talking.
Yes.
During this conversation, I'm feeling better, and I felt okay at the beginning of the call. Do you know what I mean? I think it really helps.
Yeah, I think it's just the power. It's the simple power. Again, presence is the power of our presence for each other. But I love that you mentioned around counselling, and also to your point about the MOT. Actually, it's again given the waiting list. if you are grieving, get yourself on a waiting list, because I always say this to people all the time. I'm like, get yourself on that waiting list, because that 6 months or 9 months, whatever it is, will fly by, and you just never know as well, where maybe by that point you might need it even more.
The grief's not going anywhere.
Yeah, the grief, exactly.
Sorry.
Not going anywhere.
Really sorry, it's still been there in 9 months, and it would just be a bit deeper down the funnel. But
yeah, exactly this. I've been really supported through NHS talking therapies. It's been really transformational for me. So I definitely recommend that as a path. But I love that, just talking to people. And also I could imagine if you're in a big friendship group and your dynamic is very much, we go to the pub, we go to music event, whatever it might be. Equally, I think what you shared around actually one-on-one can be really powerful. I feel into the energy. Who do you think actually I could have this conversation with and say, hey, can we go for a walk and talk, or can I just give you a bell and talk about this, is really powerful. But as you acknowledged, not everybody is going to be able to hold our pain. So as well, I'd say, to your point, choose your people. That doesn't have to be everyone. And sometimes, as you shared, it's about saying, I love you in this way.
yeah,
I can't talk to you about that.
No.
And sometimes as well, in grief as well, it's accepting there are those friendships. I've had it where there's also those friendships where you're like, you just haven't been here for me. And it's okay equally if you go, do you know what? I need to let you go right now, because I've changed and I've transformed.
Yeah.
I'm different now through this.
Absolutely. No, definitely. Yeah. Going back to the group of men, like men in groups can be amazing for each other.
Yeah.
Because of culture, because all it takes is one person in that group, when you share your feelings, to say something derogatory or might make you and then they all jump on it, and then you'll never say it again. So there is definitely a place for sharing something with the group, but it can be safer maybe when it's one-on-one. I've never had a bad experience in that sense, but I just know what men, like some men can be like, unfortunately. Some people can be like, it's not just men, it's some people in general can be funny about these things, you know?
Exactly. Unfortunately, it's that mirror of them that's there, that which they cannot hold, and it's triggering all sorts of stuff in them. But yeah, we can really internalize it. So I think as well, there's a lovely, lovely, gentle path here, which is very much that of, okay, who can I connect with one-on-one, have a cup of tea?
And men are like natural carers, and this is not a talk about masculinity, so I'm not going to get on the place of the man in the world, because there's loads I could talk about around that. But if you look at the systemic, which some of it there is an issue with, and some that there's great things in, but the idea of being the breadwinner, the one that's stoic and keeps itself together, like there's a lot that's negative in that. But also, if you think about your friend, they're a carer. They are, that is what they do, is to get like men, women and children first.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like men, it's been rooted in you that you come last in a way, and actually that's, if you talk about workplace, there'll be a lot of people listening to this being like, bullshit. But when it comes to health and, we don't go to the doctors, we put others before us. And actually, I think, so when it comes to talking about others, your mates will listen to you, because actually they care about your mental health, sadly, than they care about their own.
Yes, I love that.
Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, remember that your mates do really want to help you,
Oh, I love that, because also what you shared is it's just that reconnect. We humans have a shared humanity. And I think these types of conversations, it surprises us in a world where we haven't really gone to those depths of ourselves sharing. When we go, oh, wow, there's a whole lot of humanity around me. There's a lot of people who are willing to lean in and listen. And also, I think that it's what I'm circling back to what you shared earlier about you being that person who will always check in on others. But equally, and I can call myself out on the amount of times when someone's like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm fine. Yeah, no problem. All good. But actually, equally, I think within friendship groups, that's where it is about the check-ins with each other. So maybe if one person's speaking to another person and sharing from their heart, but the other person isn't that forthcoming, even with that, of being like, oh yeah, but how's things with you? Let's just do a little check-in. I'd love to hear what's happening for you, what feels good, but also what feels difficult at the moment. Can be really, really transformational, and it can be life-changing. Again, the lady Lisa Marshall, who I just recently spoke to on the pod, of the Widow Diaries, she mentioned around how with her husband, he was always the cheery one, the one checking in on everybody, but actually he was the one that needed just that one person to say, How are you really feeling? Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And again, I think this is where we can really change people's lives and just reconnect us to our shared humanity, isn't it? Going grand in the ambition of these connections.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes if we're talking about others, in you sharing, if you're not doing well, share that. I used to meet up with I still do meet up with my sister, but when we used to meet up, I would, because of, I think, what we've been through, and with my mum as well, if they say, how are you? I could never tell them if I was struggling, because I was like, through their own, I never want to see my mum in that place again. So I never want to put my feelings on her, and it got to the point with my sister where she thought I had this perfect life, and I was never struggling with the death of Keith and our dad, not having general life problems, because I just always told her I was okay. And actually, she wanted to know that it wasn't perfect.
Yes.
That she, and as soon as I started sharing all those things, suddenly she felt more and able to share them with me, because she felt like I could empathize with her. And it was driving a bit of a wedge between us, then. So there's actually a lot that sharing can do for your relationships, and with your family and also your friends, and helping them as well as helping you.
Wow, Jamie. Yes, I love that. It gives so much permission and gives so much opening and opportunity for connections in ways that we never had before. I think it's so important. So, Jamie, I've got one final question for you. And that is, from where you're sitting today, if you could give advice to younger Jamie, maybe just at that point of when you mentioned you transitioned into adulthood, obviously, in that moment of Keith's death, from where you're sitting today, what words of wisdom would you give to Jamie back then?
So I heard a quote the other day, and I can't remember what it was on TV somewhere or a podcast or something. I'm probably not going to get it right, so it might take a couple of goes, but it was, and I heard it and I was like, wow, I wish I knew this, because I know it now, but I didn't at the time. There's two types of pain. There's pain that uses you, and then there's pain that you use. And if I knew that, and I definitely used my pain, my pain did me. And I think I've got to a place in my life where I wish my dad was around. I wish Keith was around. But the pain that put me through, and the trauma, that I couldn't have paid a life coach enough money to give me those life lessons. I've got to a place in my life now where there's no way I could have them in my life. So there's no point in even imagining that. So and it's so hard to say this, but grateful for that experience in a way, because that pain has made me who I am today. And I think about that as a sacrifice that they made, which sounds it sounds crazy, and maybe it's not the right way of thinking about it, but it will all be okay. That's the first thing to say. It's all going to be okay, but you can use this experience, this pain, in a way that is going to make you so resilient, so positive. Your children, if you're lucky enough to have them one day, will benefit from this experience, and so will those around you. So I think to talk about the pain, there's the pain that you use, and there's pain that uses you, and then there's pain that you use. And I think use this pain, live in it for a bit, and then find a way of using it,
Wow, that's so powerful, because actually it really speaks to the choices that we can make when we are present to it, and when we are able to say, actually, as you shared, I'm willing to go into this pain, I'm going through it, and actually on the other side there will be that caterpillar in the cocoon into the butterfly metamorphosis that does come. And I feel really passionate about that. I feel exactly the same as someone who was and still am a leadership coach, but actually going through grief as I was witnessing the transformational journeys with my clients. And then suddenly I realized, exactly the same as you, I could go to ground for a year and work with my grief. And actually that transformed me in ways that I have never, ever dreamt could. It's quite incredible when change is forced upon us, and it's not about toxic positivity and being like, let's look for the positives and all of this, because as you shared, we would all of us would say in a heartbeat, I would give this all up to have, like, for me it's my daughter, I'd give it up in a second to have her here, all in a heartbeat. But at the same time, as you shared, when you can't, and you know that we can't, actually, what am I going to do with this? I'm going to use it and I'm going to grow through it.
Well, then it makes that, death not in vain,
Yes.
Here's a real, and there can be pressure in that. But I think that's the way I get to it. And yeah, as I said, obviously you would goes without saying,
yes,
you give it all up in a heartbeat, but we know that is not possible. So there's only kind of one alternative, really.
Yeah, there really is only one alternative, because the other alternative is avoidance. And as we've spoken about, the outcomes of that are not so great. What it does to us, our health, our emotional landscape, our outcomes in life, etc. So Jamie, you have really inspired me just on this topic of just I think what I find really inspiring is that presence that we can have with death and grief at any age, and actually the roles that we can all take as well when there are young children who have been bereaved of someone significant in their life. And actually, if we can all have these conversations, it's really powerful to see that growth and that meaning and that purpose that can flow from there. So before we wrap up this conversation, I'd love for you just to share if there's anything that you wish to about you, your work, anything where people can connect with you.
No kind of hot picks or anything major to share, but I mean, low-key, you can find us lowkeyfilms.co.uk. That's my production company, creative studio. I'm on LinkedIn, Jamie Gamache. I try and share there quite often and talk about different subjects, not so much grief and death. So I keep that off LinkedIn, but maybe this podcast will be a reason to start sharing some conversations around that.
Love that. And definitely as well, I think Kindling, you can rent it, can't you?
Yeah,
it's on Sky the other day. I found it.
Yeah, it's on Sky and Amazon. It's been on BBC for free for the last 3 years, and our license has just expired. So currently, yeah, if you're a buyer for a broadcaster and you're listening to this podcast, Kindling is available. But it's and it was on Amazon for free, but that's just lapsed. So at the moment, we're in a kind of between period, but you can rent it for not a lot of money on Amazon and Sky, and where you not all good bookstores, but the online equivalent.
Love that. I think at time of record it was £3.49 on Sky. So that right now is less than the price of coffee in London.
It is less. Yeah.
So I would say it's definitely a worthwhile investment.
Definitely, yeah, worthwhile.
But I would definitely recommend, we need more of this sort of storytelling. So I definitely recommend to go out there. And also, obviously, me being formerly of the advertising and entertainment world as well, just for anyone brand side, etc. as well, just for like real human storytelling, as you shared, there's so much lived experience that goes into everything that you and Connor do as well. Yeah. Definitely go check out Low-key, but also just stay tuned to see what Jamie's got coming in the future. And if it's anything death and griefy, then guaranteed I'm getting you back on the pod and we're going to talk about it. But for now, Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today for really, I think it's a really important conversation, particularly when it comes to men, and actually for all of us, but particularly men and friendship groups of men, of actually how we can talk about death and grief and actually what it can bring to us in our lives. So thank you.
Right, pleasure.
Thank you for joining me on Death on the Daily. If you like this episode, it would mean a lot if you could hit subscribe. Plus, head to the show notes to find out about my work as a grief coach, and there's a grief journaling freebie there for you. Until we meet here next time, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something